Good evening. My name is Rabbi Robyn Fisher, and I'm currently the sixth rabbi of Beth Or in Miami, Florida. In honor of our 40th anniversary, we are reconnecting with all of the rabbis who have served this community over the years. And this evening, we are, in honor of our 40th anniversary, this evening, we are excited to welcome Beth Or's first and founding rabbi, Rabbi Rami Shapiro. Baruch haba, welcome back to your old stomping grounds, at least virtually. It was so exciting to connect with you in anticipation of this conversation together and to put a face behind the legendary Rabbi Rami, who I had heard so much about. Before we get into what you have been up to since you were here in Miami, let's take a step back to those moments when Beth Or was just an idea, back to 1981. Can you share with us the genesis of this community? How did it come about? What were you trying to create in starting your own house of worship? You have to unmute, please.
Okay, now I'm unmuted. So technically, it actually started a little bit earlier, a couple of years earlier, while I was still in rabbinical school. I was in the Air Force. I was on active duty in the Air Force Reserves, and I was stationed in Homestead. And there really was nothing for rabbi to do in Homestead. And I ended up meeting some people who I had connected with through a rabbi friend in Chicago, and they wanted to do something for the High Holy Days in 79 maybe. So we put an ad in the newspaper, maybe it was 1980, I'm not sure. But we put an ad in the newspaper, Miami Herald, saying an alternative High Holy Day experience. We had 80 people came. We then said, if you're interested in doing something as a community, let us know. And 20 people out of the 80 stuck around. And we basically met in parks, and we had no plan. But once we formulated Beth Or, we knew, or at least I had an inkling of what I wanted it to be. And I really wasn't interested in creating a conventional synagogue. I mean, it's Kendall. There were synagogues every 12 feet. So if you wanted a great Reform synagogue, there was Beth Am, and then there was Bet Ra, and there was the conservative shul, and Orthodox were around. So there was no need to do any of that. So I wanted to just try something different. And the basis, at least in my mind, what the difference was how you could reinvent Judaism for late 20th and eventually early 21st century. And that meant rethinking the notion of God, rethinking the notion of Torah, rethinking the notion of prayer, to try to come up with something that spoke to people who were similar to me, who didn't believe in, at least in that time, who knows what people believe now, but I haven't grown since then. So who didn't believe in a supernatural God, who could not pray to the King of Kings, just the word Adonai just meant nothing to me. And so we began to shift things around, changing the Hebrew slightly, but mostly playing with the English, because most of us were fluent in English and not in Hebrew. So we used to talk about the source and substance of all existence or all reality. It was more of a Spinoza version of God than it was the classical Reform version of God. And the idea was to create a think tank, to just try things, see what worked. Some of the stuff worked fabulously well. And some of the stuff, you all said to me, don't do that again. And I learned my lesson.
I want to hear some of those things. What were those things?
Here's what didn't work. Jedi Shabbat did not work. Star Wars was hot. I thought the kids would love a Jedi Shabbat. They came in, now you can buy a toy lightsaber, but we used flashlights. And the idea was to lay on the floor and see if you could get the force in your flashlight to not wobble, see how still you could get. It was a kind of Jedi yoga training, and it was a disaster. So I remember that. That did not work well. I'm trying to think of what else I was told not to do. I remember once I don't know how many of you were there, but I brought my main rabbinic teacher to visit. It was the day after Hanukkah. It was Reb Zalman Schachter Shalomi, who was a Hasidic rabbi. And though he does have side curls and a beard, and he looks a little Chabad-like because he comes from that tradition, he went overboard when he came to visit. And he wore the big fur shtreimel, and he took his earlocks, which are usually behind his ear, and he curled them down so they hung way down. And he came with the whole kaftan thing. I mean, he walked onto our stage right out of central casting for Fiddler on the Roof. And the people who came said, "What? This is not what we signed up for. Don't bring him back." Even though the things he was teaching were the things I was teaching, because I learned it from him, he just didn't look the part. Oh, I'll tell you one other thing that didn't work. I didn't like the idea of a dress code. And so I didn't look the part. And one Shabbos, after I wore my Mickey Mouse t-shirt, I was told, no, I think that's not, you don't have to wear a robe, but you ought to wear a shirt and tie at least.
Do you remember who told you that? We
Uh,
won't. It's okay.
Yeah, I actually do, but no, I'm not going to say.
Yeah, it's okay.
But they probably don't remember, but I remember.
So what about some things that really did work? What stuck?
Well, I think what stuck, at least for me, was the liturgy and the way we explored Torah without worrying about what the ancient said, but really explored what we thought it could mean to us today. I do know that one among you, and I won't single her out, Asi, but one person came to me and said, "Why do we have to do Torah every week?" Now, I don't know if you remember that. I remember that. And it dawned on me that the reason we do it every week is because it's the only thing I know. Other rabbis are doing book reviews and movie reviews, and I just don't know anything about that. So I think our Torah stuff was pretty impressive. And the materials that I created, both the liturgy and some of the teaching materials, ended up being published. So, eventually I hope, in fact, I know this is true, you should move on beyond. I mean, I've moved on beyond the liturgies I wrote in the 80s and 90s. But so I'm not suggesting it's a problem that you don't use those things, not at all. I'm just saying that they got published. Sorry?
It's hovering a little bit. We still have it for the high holy days, but COVID has changed things. And
yeah. So the things that turned into books, I mean, because that's my primary focus, is writing. Even then, that was what I wanted to be, was a writer. Rabbi was a way to pay the bills, though. Beth Or really didn't help that much with paying the bills.
I was going to say,
I had another job, but it was the writing that really mattered to me, and testing it out with all of you to see what worked and what didn't work. And like I said, I mean, it's most of what you and I used has been turned into books that thousands and thousands of people use.
Did your vision change over the years with regard to liturgy, with regard to building community?
I was never a good community builder. I relied on a lot of people to help build community. But my ideal community builder was Dougie Schwartz. And he passed away. And that was sort of a real transition point for me. Without Dougie, I just felt, uh-oh, now what? So community building wasn't my strong point. I'm pretty much a hermit. COVID lockdown hasn't changed my life much at all. But what did change, other than community, is my understanding. I mean, even when I was at Beth Or, our earliest liturgies spoke of God in the third person, source and substance of all being. And then I rewrote the liturgy a second time, and it was all more from the Martin Buber perspective of speaking to a thou. Even though I didn't believe in a person as a God, I still wanted something more personal. And so I began to switch that way. And now I'm in both camps. I'm comfortable. I have had numerous experiences with a divine presence, not a person,
Mhm.
but with a divine presence that I could address as you. Uh, and I understand that experience, or I understand that thou that I would address as being a way for the abstract source and substance concept to become more personal to me as an individual. I don't know if that makes any sense, but yeah, that changed. That changed. I mean, I don't believe in God in the conventional sense. Never have since I was
How did
16
that
years old.
translate into the community you had? Well, I know you were in community, but the community you did build, whether it was by accident or by design, um, just through the liturgy.
I mean, that's my guess, through the liturgy. I mean, I tried to bring mystical experience or mystical practices better. I tried to bring meditation, contemplation, chanting into the synagogue. And the more I got into it myself, the more I tried to make it part of what we were doing. Um, I don't know if it was whether it was successful or not, but since I've left, I mean, I left Beth Or and I went and ran a school, a mystic school for rabbis for just about a year and a half. Um, the teachings, the school itself was great. The finances were horrendous. So that was not a good fit because I don't raise money well. But the mystic stuff that I began with Beth Or has only ripened since, in all the years since, 40 years.
How many years were you here?
20.
That's a half a person, half a lifetime.
Well, only if you die at 40.
Just a lot of years.
A lot of years, yeah.
If you were going to do it all over again, would you do it differently?
I wouldn't do it. I wouldn't do it. If I had to do it all over again, well, I mean, if you sent me back to 1978, 9, 81, when we formalized Beth Or, no, I wouldn't do it differently. I wouldn't know how else to do it. But if I were to do it now, and I've been asked several times to do something now, I'm not interested. It's too hard the work that Rabbi Robyn does is too hard. I'm too old. I just can't handle the politics. I can't handle the stuff that I was not good at, which was, I felt, the pastoral stuff, is stuff that I'm even worse at now. So what I do now, well, with COVID, I do just Zoom, which is pretty weak compared to what I was doing. But what I've been doing for the last 20 years has been running retreats around the world. And those are all in person, and those are all based on meditation practices and chanting and all kinds of things that don't really fit in a synagogue where you're trying to get families involved with little children. I mean, stuff that you can't even do with a Jedi Shabbat service.
So, when thinking back during those 20 years that you were here, was there anything specific happening in the world that informed your synagogue, the Beth Or that we knew then, maybe even the liturgy that you were creating, the books that were percolating?
There were some things happening that I remember, that two in particular, that defined my understanding of Beth Or. Because if you read the ads in the Herald as the high holidays unfold, every synagogue is, they put out their best message, right? We're family centered, we're community focused, we're a loving community. I mean, all the BS, and you probably use it, everybody does, but all the stuff that you say, it's marketing, right? And you never know if it's true. Two things during my tenure at Beth Or, I think, spoke to the truth of our advertising. The first one was the AIDS crisis, where we pulled together as a community and worked with the AIDS community in Miami or worked with the gay community in Miami. And I remember one thing we did was we bought them an ambulance. I don't know if we paid for all of it, but we paid for a lot of it. We raised money and bought them an ambulance. I remember that some of us went down to protest at Oh, what's that cool place? I can't remember the stone. It's not, it's, you probably rent it out for weddings.
The
Coral
his Maya?
Castle.
Yeah, what is it?
Coral Castle.
Coral Castle. Yeah, I think there
Coral
was a
Castle.
big gathering at Coral Castle with President Reagan and the Pope, whoever the Pope was in the 80s. And they came, and many Beth Or people were there protesting the Pope and Ronald Reagan because of their policy toward AIDS. So that spoke to me, that we put our money where our mouth is. I mean, now there's a couple things that are coming up. Another thing that spoke to me was when it was me. I was annoyed with the idea of mitzvah day, which was really popular back then. I have no idea if it's popular now, but one day a year where everyone gets together and you have, different choices, and you go nail some nails into a Habitat for Humanity house. I mean, we did those things. The house I worked on, if a magnet walked by, it would probably just pull it off its, destroy it, because I put so many nails in my little piece of wood. But I wanted something more lasting. And so that was my idea. Then other people came forth and created the garden we have in the back. And then from that grew teaching kids and families how to do organic gardening. And then we did some gardening in Overtown. That's right. It's Overtown, right? We tried to help people build community gardens. I mean, that was amazing work. And then we did the thing called People of the Books, where we adopted kindergarten and first grade classrooms in the poorer parts of Miami and Homestead, where our teachers, because we had a lot of educators in the community, would go and meet with their colleagues in those schools and say, what books do you want the kids to have? And these were kids who don't even own books. I went up to New York, I worked with Scholastic and whatever other companies we used. And we would tell them the teachers would tell us what they needed for their kids. And then we would get the books from the publishers, and then we would bring them to the kids. And originally the idea was just to give them books, but it grew into a literacy program where our young kids would teach the very young kids, help them learn to read. I mean, that was an amazing thing. And then I'll give you one more example, and that was Hurricane Andrew. So, Hurricane Andrew devastated devastated a lot of neighborhoods, but certainly devastated mine. So I was sort of landlocked because you couldn't get out on the roads and stuff. So I had nothing to do with this, and maybe someone here or someone's here did, you can fill us in, but somehow, and it wasn't magic, it was hard work, somehow a telephone tree was created and every member was contacted to see how they were doing. And then, and this I was part of, though I was just participating, I didn't run it. Then somebody organized it so we could go out. We brought water to people. I mean, we went and found our members and helped them out. And unlike, if I remember this correctly, unlike every other synagogue in the neighborhood, Kendall, we never closed. And that's because, we had those giant palm trees that were going up the front of the lawn, and the wind, the hurricane, knocked them all down. But it knocked them down, not facing the building, but perpendicular to, parallel to the building. So they were like pews. And we had services with people sitting on the logs. So we never stopped the services. We just didn't have the ambiance that we had before. That to me spoke, volumes as to the quality of the community and how people actually cared about one another. It was, that was an amazing, test of our advertising. And we passed with flying colors.
Yeah, it kind of brings me to a question, like what sets Beth Or apart from other communities? And that may be, one of the things that you're referring to, is that there is a spirit about it, down to earth, ready to help and participate. But what else do you think about when you think about the spirit or what sets Beth Or apart from other communities that you've been connected to?
I hope that, it's still that kind of loving, down to earth community. I don't want to say that other places aren't. I don't know. But I would say what separates any synagogue, I would say two things. One, um, I guess the philosophy behind it, or even the theology behind it. And two, and maybe primarily, is the rabbi. I think that maybe synagogues don't like to admit it, but what makes one synagogue really different from another is not just the denomination. And I don't know if you're still Reconstructionists, but we were moderately Reconstructionists. We were Reconstructionists by default. I mean, I was a Reform graduate and I wanted to stick with the Reform movement, but they wouldn't have us. They were, you probably don't know this, but Rabbi Baumgard from Beth Or, he started a statewide campaign to keep me from moving to Florida.
You
He
told
was,
me. That doesn't sound very welcoming.
He was not very happy that I was coming. He didn't like my ideas or my theology at all. And so the Reform movement wouldn't allow us to join, which makes sense even without Rabbi Baumgarten, because there was Beth Or up, and there was Beth Or a couple blocks up. So they said, no, we don't need another Reform synagogue. And so the Reconstructionists contacted us and we joined them because I felt we needed something larger than being just independent. So, the denomination may or may not make it unique, but I think fundamentally it's the rabbi. The rabbi should, in my estimation, the rabbi should set the tone. And I think people join. I mean, I know people join because it's convenient or it's close, or, I don't know why people join synagogues. I don't think that's why they joined Beth Or, because we didn't really have a neighborhood synagogue. People had to drive to get to us. So I would never underestimate the power or the uniqueness of the rabbi as a driving factor. So they're lucky to have you, Robyn.
Oh, thanks. We'll have to do a poll later.
Do a poll and I will send you a bill, but still.
Thanks. Rabbi Rami, when you think about the years that have passed and you think about the 20 years of a place that you helped create, that you left such a living legacy of, oftentimes we don't think about our legacy until we're later in life, but yours came pretty early on in your career. What do you think about that? That is just a huge legacy that is synonymous with your name and your, it reverberates through everything that we do, except for your picture.
Yeah, you should send me that picture and I'll burn it. But
listen,
I just don't think
to that. Don't take offense. We've already spoken about it. It's okay.
I don't really think that way. I don't think in terms of legacy. I'm very happy that it still exists. I mean, I didn't think it wouldn't. I don't think, I think the rabbi sets the tone, but rabbis are replaceable. So I didn't think it wouldn't outlast me, but I don't think of it in terms of legacy. And the other day, somebody asked me, because my 70th birthday is coming up, which I know, for Norma's going, what a baby, 70. But so my 70th birthday is coming up in a few months. And someone asked me, what did I do that really mattered? And I couldn't answer the question. I don't know. I don't know what mattered. I'm not even sure I know what mattered means. I know that I've written lots of books and I know that lots of people have read them, but I don't know if it makes a difference in their lives. And then after that, I got an email from this guy in Poland. His name is Bogdan Bialik, though I'm not pronouncing Bogdan properly. And maybe 10, 12 years ago, one of my books was translated into Polish. And his company was the publisher. And then they brought me to Poland to do a countrywide lecture series on my book. And they connected me to all the Jewish organizations in different parts of Poland. But the first weekend I was there, they took me to this town called Kilsa. And the Jews of Kilsa were almost all murdered in the Holocaust. There were a handful that came back to Kilsa in 1946, and the Polish inhabitants of Kilsa killed those who came back. They had taken their property. They didn't want to give their houses up and all of that. And so they killed them. It's called the Kilsa pogrom of 1946. And since 1946, there had been nothing Jewish in that town. So they brought me to Kilsa with, I don't know, it's not under the auspices of, but in collaboration with the Roman Catholic Diocese of Kilsa. And they set me up in a monastery, and I ran a Shabbaton, a Sabbath retreat. And it was the first Jewish thing that happened in Kilsa since 1946. I did it all through translators, and we did a regular, my version of a Shabbat service in Hebrew and Polish, and studied Torah in Polish translation. Again, I didn't know Polish, but I had worked with a translator. And the idea was to reintroduce Jewish, not Jews, because there weren't any, but reintroduce Jewish and Judaism into Kilsa again. And I knew that was a huge thing. I knew it at the time, though I'd forgotten it since until I got this email from Bogdan. That was a huge thing. And I knew I had done something amazing by hosting that. It was very big in the Catholic press. They sent all these reporters to talk to me. I knew very little about Polish Jewish history, though I learned a lot while I was there, but most of it is censored by the Polish government to make Poles look like heroes when they were a mix like everybody else. Anyway, I could think of that as a legacy for some reason, but the community like Beth Or, it's alive. It can't be a legacy, right? It's just something that it is alive, right? So it's something that I helped start, but it's your legacy as much as my legacy.
In terms of what you, when we look back and seeing what we build, what impact we've made on the world, there's a growing, continues to be a growing community that started with you and the seeds that you planted that continue to flourish. And what makes it special is that there is this community that continues to find Yiddishkeit, that continues to be nourished by each other, to find meaning in connecting to each other and to Judaism. And that doesn't happen by accident. That happens because there's a community of people that are purposely, with kavanah, coming together to do that and to be there for each other.
Yeah, but I would say that's the legacy of the community. That's your legacy as much as my legacy.
Okay, well, I'm happy to be part of that too.
So yeah, me too.
Okay, good. So I guess since you started talking about your involvement in Poland, and you've already started transitioning to what you've been up to, tell us, we obviously hear that you've been writing and you've been quite the prolific author. From what I understand, we have 36 books under our belt at this moment. Is that what keeps you busy? You've been thinking about and writing and haven't stopped.
Yeah, I've always wanted to be a writer since I was in 7th grade. So I keep doing that. I love doing that. But in addition, the books, I thought the books were an end in themselves. And then it turns out the books were a stepping stone to in-person teaching. So, I used to, before COVID, I used to travel. I mean, I've taught in India 4 times. I've taught in Japan. I've taught in Turkey. I mean, I've taught all over the place. And those things are very gratifying because they don't know anything about Jews, the places I went. I mean, in India, just as an example, I went, like I said, I've been there 4 times, different places, but one of the places I went, there were thousands of swamis who came, and it wasn't just for me. I wasn't the only presenter in this week-long conference. I'm trying to think of somebody you might know. What's his name? The Dalai Lama, that guy. Yeah, he was there, but he's not a big deal. But anyway, so it was a very large conference, and I'm sure the Dalai Lama brought in more people than Rabbi Rami did. But I gave a talk on what was unique about Judaism. That was the theme of the week, was what's unique about your tradition. So I talked about what I thought was unique about Judaism. And after it was over, the response among these swamis was phenomenal, both as a group, just, clapping, but coming up afterwards in smaller groups and talking to me, because what I talked to them about was the notion that, in Judaism, we argue. In Judaism, we don't accept, we don't have a pope or a guru who tells us this is the answer. You have no choice, that you have to accept this. And I talked about all that stuff and how you argue with God and the Torah and all these different things. And they were shocked, astounded, and they wanted to know how they could bring that into Hinduism. So I couldn't answer that question. But just introducing them to something that was so intrinsically Jewish and so alien to them, and yet so compelling to them that they wanted to see what they could do with that idea, within their own tradition. I mean, that's pretty exciting. So, I mean, I used to love getting on an airplane for 12 hours at a time and going to some cool exotic place and telling them about Judaism.
Oh, good, because rabbi means teacher, and that is at the heart of who you are, as a teacher. And I'm guessing that with all of those books, that's where you have this burning desire to release what is in your head and your soul. And what is it that's burning inside of you that you have to teach the world? What is the essence of the books that you are writing?
Yeah, alles is Gott. Everything is God. That's the only thing I taught. It's the only thing I taught at Beth Or. It's the only thing I've taught for 40 years. I've just done it in different ways. But that's my only. If I have a message, that's my message. That everything is part of the divine, and that when you awaken to that, and everyone has the innate capacity to do that, when you awaken to your own divinity, you can only act with love and justice and compassion toward all other living beings. And I teach that using biblical text, but that's the message, and that's the message in all of the books.
So you mentioned earlier that the unique part of Judaism is our ability to argue and wrestle with our text, not taking things at face value, especially in front of, in face of a Hindu community that I know that you have spent time studying and connecting with, Buddhism and Hinduism. And I'm wondering how that intersects with you as a rabbi, and what is it that they have that we are missing or not able to provide?
Yes. So I would say the thing that Buddhism and Hinduism in particular, but not just, Sufism also, have that Judaism could do a lot more with is silence. My ideal service would be like the Quakers. You go in, you sit down, everybody shuts up. An hour later, whoever the leader is shakes the hand of the person, I think it's to their right or their left, maybe both, and a handshake goes around the community until everyone's had a handshake. Then they have announcements, and if it was a Jewish Quaker service, they'd have cake. But silence. I think. I mean, I love the music. And there is a Quaker service where you start with hymns. So maybe I would do this. I forget what it's called, but chanting is something that I love in Judaism and in Hinduism especially. So I would bring that call and response chant in more, but that's already coming in. There's a lot of like the kirtan rabbi stuff and Yofia's material, her Kabbalistic kirtan, she called it. So that's there, but silence. I think, it says in the Psalms, I guess, silence to you is praise. And I think, yeah. So that fragile voice of silence, I think, it's like when we do silent prayer, I love when the rabbis, and now we will read the silent Amida. And then it's read aloud. It's like, maybe the cantor doesn't know what the word silence means. I don't know. So silence is what I think we could get. But you're right about, I mean, I've been initiated into the Ramakrishna order of Hinduism. I spent years with a Zen master. I still have an Indian teacher in California, and one again, another one in Northern California, one in Southern California. I mean, I have teachers in all these different traditions because I think from the mystical end, they're all pointing in the same direction. So, in Yiddish, alles ist Gott, but they have their own version of that in their own languages. And that's really the heart, the mystic heart of the world's religions. And that's what I'm interested in. And that's where I resonate. And that's where all my teachers come from. I mean, you can see the wall behind me. I mean, I'm over some of them, but there's icons and iconography from every one of the major traditions that have been gifted to me from different teachers.
So I guess on that same note, with the craziness of the world in which we live in, from this pandemic to politics to growing anti-Semitism and discrimination,
No, it's a thing on top.
what do all of these beautiful faith traditions have to teach us, and what are we not still enough to listen to?
Oh, wow. That's a great question. I have two answers. One sort of more political and the other spiritual. Spiritual, what they have to teach us is that we're all interconnected and that we have to create a system where you can't buy your way into a vaccine, right? That's just immoral. You can't, I work for Spirituality and Health magazine. I write for the magazine, and I write for the digital side. I do their podcast. And if you don't subscribe to the magazine, you should. But I have a column in the print magazine every issue where people write questions. And if you want to send me questions at rabbirami.com, send me questions, and I'll maybe the magazine will accept them, and I'll answer them in the magazine. But someone sent me a question saying, is it okay? She has a connection and she can jump ahead in the vaccine line. And she said, is it okay? And I gave her a one-word response. I said, no, it's not okay. And it wouldn't be okay if we felt that interconnectedness. That interconnectedness would but it'd give us a way to deal with environmental problems. You name the problem, and it's probably rooted in othering and a sense of alienation from the natural world. Then I remember that was sort of the spiritual end. On the political end, I think what we learn from every religious tradition is that they're easily corrupted. I mean, you take something that is as beautiful as Judaism, I think, and you put it in the hands of right-wing settler movement in Israel, and you end up with a Jewish Taliban. You take Islam and you put it in the hands of Islamists, and you end up with, ISIS. You take Christianity, Protestantism, not exclusively, but you take white evangelical Protestant Christianity, and it easily morphs into Christian terrorists, the Christian Taliban. We saw them. The vast majority of people the insurrectionists who stormed the Capitol on January 6th, they were Christians. They were prayed to Christ in the Senate chamber. They had their Jesus flags. Every religion is easily corrupted. No matter what it is at its best, it easily falls prey to its worst. And we have to be on guard against that within, in our case, Judaism, but, religion in general.
I love that. One of the, in preparation for tonight, one of the things I
You
saw.
prepared?
I did.
I should have prepared. Wait, I'll come back. I'll prepare.
You don't have to. I did it for you.
Oh, okay.
It's all in you. You wrote this quotation: for me, being a rabbi isn't about making Jews Jewish, but about using Judaism as a tool for making meaning and discovering wisdom. We talked a little bit about that. I'm wondering if you can relate that to the ills of the world we were just talking about. What are the tools that we can draw from in discovering the wisdom, how we need to react, how we need to respond, how we need to show up?
Yeah, well, it's not unique to Judaism, but when we are true to the best of our tradition, it becomes an important Jewish gift to the world. I mean, one thing would be the very concept of Hineni, here I am, where God calls to the characters in the Torah and their response is Hineni, here I am. I'm ready to be confronted by whatever you're confronting me with, and then to do something about it. If you don't think of it in terms of supernaturalism, we're confronted by the existential realities of life moment to moment, and we have to step up to the plate and say, okay, here I am. What can I do in my little way to make the world a little better for my being born into it? I think that if we took, one of the most radical teachings in the entire Jewish corpus is the story in the Talmud where the Gentile guy wants to convert to Judaism on the condition that you teach him the entire Torah while he stands on one foot. And he goes to Rabbi Shammai, and Shammai dismisses him. The guy's a kook. He goes to Rabbi Hillel, and Rabbi Hillel, without hesitation, at least in the story, simply says to him, that which is hateful to you, don't do to anybody else. That's the entire Torah. Now, everything else is commentary. Go study the commentary. It's an incredibly radical teaching for two reasons. One, that statement, what's hateful to you, don't do to anybody else, it's not in the Torah. The first time we ever hear that statement is Hillel saying it. And then he says, everything else is commentary. Commentary on what? Commentary on his Judaism of compassion. That which is hateful to you, don't do to someone else. That's his Torah of compassion. Everything else, our holidays, our liturgy, our books, and all those things that make Judaism Jewish, are commentaries on compassion, which means the way we should use them and understand them has to be in service to compassion. It's not usually. I mean, there's a whole debate. I don't know if anyone, I've not been watching the trial because I'm too easily aggravated. But the Orthodox Jewish guy who's defending President Trump.
This guy?
Yeah, that guy. So every time he drank water, he put his hand on his head. So it was because he normally wears a kippah, but he wasn't wearing it because he doesn't, I don't know, he said he doesn't like to do it when he's doing these kinds of things. Okay. So he just put his hand on top of his head to be his yarmulke, so he could say, thanks God while I have a drink of water. So a friend of mine called and said, have you been looking at Facebook? Well, I don't do Facebook. That's one evil I've managed to avoid. But on Facebook, they're having this big debate. Some people are saying he took the cap off his water bottle and put that on his head. Does that constitute a yarmulke? And the answer is no. Then he put his hand on his head. Now, I was told, being raised Orthodox, that works. Turns out it doesn't work. My father probably told me that, and he didn't know, but he said that. So he was putting his hand on his head. That doesn't constitute a yarmulke. But if he put because he had long sleeves, if he put his sleeve on his head, so there was cloth on his head, that constitutes a yarmulke. To me, that's madness.
That's not, Beth Or would reimagine that scenario and think about other ways to,
here's how, Rabbi, here's how I hope Beth Or would reimagine that scenario. Convict the SOB and just get rid of the rest of the trial. No one should defend.
The rest is commentary.
Right. The rest is commentary.
Oh, I love that. I know that we're getting close to the end, but I wanted to end because you wrote a particular prayer that has become part of liturgy. So many Siddurim now carry this particular prayer, and it's been recited over and over again, not just in our liturgy, but in others all over the world. And I wanted to end with that, and that is unending love. I'll read it in a moment. Does this surprise you how popular that has become? And what was the context in which you wrote that?
Yeah, it absolutely surprised me. It wasn't anything. I rewrote a lot of the liturgy. This was just one piece. Why it caught on, it's been used in prayer books in a variety of denominations. And then it's been put to music in all kinds of different styles. And, people say, can I have your permission? I always give permission. And I guess, let me hear what you did. It's just amazing. But I feel a little bit like Debbie Friedman. she wrote all this great music.